You think you know the Austin 1100 over 1300? This wasn't just another British family car that quietly faded into history. This was the vehicle that outsold every competitor in Britain for most of a decade, yet somehow managed to destroy itself from the inside out. If you lived through the 1960s and 70s, you probably knew someone who owned one. But there are truths about this vehicle that British Motor Corporation never wanted to admit publicly. It's 1962, and Britain is emerging from austerity. Harold Macmillan has told the nation they've never had it so good, and ordinary working families can finally afford cars. The Morris Mini has revolutionized small car design, but families need something bigger. Enter Alec Isigonis, the engineer who created the Mini with his next masterpiece. The Morris 1100 launched on August 15, 1962, and would become Britain's best-selling car for most of the next decade. Here's what they don't tell you. This car was simultaneously brilliant and catastrophically flawed. It pioneered front-wheel drive and sophisticated suspension that wouldn't become mainstream for another 20 years. Yet it was plagued by industrial chaos, mechanical compromises, and design decisions that turned these cars into rust buckets within years. Over 2 million were built, yet survivors are now rarer than many exotic cars. Today, we're exploring 7 shocking truths about the Austin 1100 over 1300 that the manufacturers hoped you'd forget. Truth 1. The body shell was designed by a genius engineer who ignored structural advice. The most fundamental problem that eventually killed thousands of these cars: rust. Floors, sills, front inner wings, outer wings, door bottoms, rear arches, boot floors, bulkhead, everywhere corroded. The rear subframe mountings would rust through, giving the car what owners darkly joked was rear-wheel steering. Here's the shocking truth. Sir Alec Isigonis insisted on designing the body shell himself, despite serious misgivings from pressed steel engineers. Isigonis was a packaging genius, but structural engineering wasn't his strength. The body shell unwittingly included rust traps in numerous crucial places. With basic 1962 anti-corrosion methods, it was a disaster. The irony is profound. Isigonis created a car with interior space comparable to the much larger Ford Cortina. The packaging was brilliant. Families could fit 5 people comfortably in a vehicle just 12 feet long. But within 5 to 7 years, these cars were literally falling apart. Survivors represent only a tiny fraction of the over 2 million cars produced. Very early 1100s used bored-out 848 cubic centimeter mini blocks due to supply shortages. One early motor had a gudgeon pin fall out during a magazine test, completely destroying the engine. This was the reality behind the glamorous launch. Truth 2. 5 different body shells were being built simultaneously. An accountant's nightmare. Now here's something that will make any modern efficiency expert wince. At one point, BMC had 5 completely different saloon shells for the 1100 going down the production lines simultaneously. The Morris version had bonnet holes for the chrome strip. The Austin didn't. Then there were the MG, Riley, Wolseley, and Vanden Plas versions, each with different front panels and varying holes drilled in the side panels and boot lids to accommodate various chrome strips. When Leyland Motor Corporation eventually merged with BMC to form British Leyland, the accountants must have looked at this setup with utter disbelief. This was badge engineering taken to an absurd extreme. The range of models available in the United Kingdom more than doubled to 29 different variants. Think about that for a moment. 29 different model combinations of essentially the same car. You could have an Austin 2-door in 1100 or 1300, deluxe or super deluxe. That's 4 variants right there. Austin 4-door, same 4 options. Austin Countryman Estate in 1100 or 1300. Super deluxe, another 2. Then the MG 2-door 1000, 300, 1 more. MG 4-door in 1100 or 1300, 2 more. Morris versions mirrored the Austin lineup with two-door and four-door options. Riley Kestrel, Wolseley, and Vanden Plas Princess each added their own variations. This manufacturing madness meant that BMC was essentially custom building variations on a production line meant for mass production. The economies of scale that should have made this car incredibly profitable were being thrown away on superficial differentiation. The Vanden Plas Princess 1000, 100 over 1000, 300 variants, introduced in 1965, offered burled walnut dashboards, Connolly leather seats, and Wilton carpets. Approximately 43,700 units were produced despite higher pricing. That's 43,700 cars, with completely different interior specifications flowing through the same factories as the basic Austin and Morris models. The financial impact was staggering. While the car was Britain's best seller, holding around 15% of the new car market at its peak, profit margins were razor thin. Following the merger with Leyland, a review of company records revealed that even the UK's best seller, the Austin Morris 1100, had to be subjected to an emergency cost reduction program to remain viable. Truth 3. The factories were paralyzed by strikes. 750,000 lost man-hours in just 12 months. Let me tell you about the production chaos that plagued this car from the beginning. In trying to satisfy demand for the ADO 16, as it was known internally, BMC was hit by continuous stoppages from both internal and external causes. In the 12 months to September 1964, the Cowley plant alone experienced 254 unofficial strikes, which caused 750,000 lost man-hours. Let that sink in for a moment. 254 strikes in 1 year at a single plant. By February 1968, the stockpile of incomplete BMC cars had reached a staggering 51,000 vehicles, mainly Minis and ADO 16s. When Leyland Finance Director John Barber travelled to Longbridge on February 14th, he noticed incomplete cars were being stored on every spare piece of ground. Imagine the capital tied up in partially built cars sitting in fields, rusting in British weather while waiting for components. The problems were multifaceted. BMC had decided too late to facelift both the Mini and ADO 16 for the Mark II versions. This gave insufficient time for suppliers to tool up and produce adequate quantities of components to meet demand for the revised models. Tail lamps were in particularly short supply. During November 1967, disputes at Longbridge and Press Steel Fisher resulted in 7,000 workers being laid off. BMC was heavily hit in the last quarter of 1966 by strikes. In the first 6 months of its financial year to the end of January 1967, BMC produced 23% fewer cars, compared with a decline in home registrations of only 15%. The company claimed to have raised its penetration of the home market from 35% to 39% in August and September, though this slipped from 39% to 27% in the final 3 months. Both the Mini and ADO 16 were cars heavily dependent on high production volumes to pay their way, and BMC was missing production targets by quite a margin. During 1970 to 71, ADO 16 production was 218,322 units. However, in 1971 to 72, it slumped to 144,347 units. The apparent collapse in demand was due to British Leyland's inability to update the car, compounded by the strike-ridden production environment. Truth 4. The hydroelastic suspension was revolutionary but misunderstood. Let's talk about one of this car's genuine triumphs, the hydroelastic suspension designed by engineer Alex Moulton. Issigonis and Moulton had studied the Citroën 2CV suspension in the mid-50s. They wanted its benefits: ride comfort, body leveling, tire contact, but with better roll stiffness. The system replaced separate springs and dampers with fluid-filled displacer units interconnected between front and rear wheels on each side. When a front wheel hit a bump, fluid transferred to the rear displacer, lifting the rear and minimizing pitch. The car also had disc brakes at the front, uncommon on mass-produced cars in the early 60s. This was genuinely advanced engineering. But many owners and garages didn't understand it. The system was actually exceptionally reliable, but perception was different. Garages lacked hydroelastic pumps, and when service was needed, owners couldn't find competent work. Standard hydroelastic pressure was 225 psi. For the 1300 GT, pressure was reduced to 205 psi to lower ride height slightly. Today, enthusiasts use a 50-50 mixture of antifreeze and distilled water as hydroelastic fluid, pumped up with a grease gun and tractor tire valve. The usual problem is crimped hose fittings that seep fluid, but these can be rebuilt. This brilliant suspension system, providing a remarkably smooth ride, became seen as a liability rather than an asset. Truth 5. The Austin America, a spectacular failure, built on 70% warranty claims. Let me tell you about one of the most disastrous export attempts in British automotive history, the Austin America. The AD016 was marketed in North America initially as the MG 1100 sports sedan from 1963, but it failed to capitalize on the success of the MG Midget and MGB. BMC decided to try again with a version of the car aimed specifically at the American market. Launched in the summer of 1968, the Austin America was supposed to battle against the Volkswagen Beetle, which was selling over 400,000 units annually in the United States, the Opel Kadett, and the increasingly popular Toyota Corolla. The America was a federalized version of the two-door Austin 1300, marketed with a name designed to tap into patriotic sentiment. Standard features included twin hydraulic circuits for the brakes, radial ply tires, comprehensive instrumentation, and luxurious trim for a small car. The automatic transmission was heavily promoted, as Americans expected automatic gearboxes, and that automatic transmission became the car's death sentence. Here's the shocking truth. One dealer reported that 70% of the Austin America units he sold ended up requiring transmission warranty work. 70%. The AP automatic transmission, which used the engine's oil pump to supply pressure for both engine lubrication and automatic transmission operation, was a catastrophe in the American market. The AD016 family was held back in North America by a reputation for fragility, with the AP Auto Box being the primary culprit. Reliability issues and terrible dealer support killed it dead. BMC and later British Leyland simply didn't have the dealer network infrastructure to support these cars properly in North America. When something went wrong, and with a 70% warranty claim rate, things went wrong frequently. Owners couldn't get parts or competent service. The car was withdrawn in 1972 and replaced by the Austin Marina, which at least had the advantage of rear-wheel drive and sharing its engine with the MGB, where parts availability was good. The Austin America represented everything wrong with British Leyland's export strategy. Take a car designed for British conditions, make minimal modifications for the export market, provide inadequate dealer support, and wonder why it fails against well-engineered Japanese competitors offering superior reliability and service networks. Truth 6. It became Britain's bestseller, despite being fundamentally unchanged for 8 years. Here's a remarkable fact that speaks to both the car's strengths and British Leyland's failures during 1970. Despite being fundamentally little changed since the introduction of the Morris 1000, 100 inches, 1962, the Austin Morris 1000, 100 over 1000, 300 retained its position as Britain's top-selling car. In that year, 132,965 vehicles were registered, compared to 123,025 for the Ford Cortina, which was in its third incarnation. Think about that carefully. Ford was on their third-generation Cortina by 1970. They'd updated the car twice, learning from customer feedback and competitive pressure. Meanwhile, The 1100 over 1300 was still fundamentally the same car Issigonis had designed at the end of the 1950s. Yes, there had been Mark II and Mark III updates with revised grilles, improved trim, and the addition of the 1,275 cubic centimeter engine option in 1967. But the basic car remained unchanged. This success continued remarkably long. By the time the 2 millionth ADO 16 was produced at the end of June 1971, the car had dominated the British market for nearly a decade. The Morris-badged version had been withdrawn in 1971 to create space in showrooms for the Morris Marina, but Austin and Vanden Plas versions remained in production in the UK until June 19, 1974. Why did it keep selling? The answer lies in its fundamental competence. The packaging was still class-leading. The interior space was exceptional for a car this size. The ride quality, thanks to hydroelastic suspension, was superior to competitors. The handling, with front-wheel drive and rack and pinion steering, was engaging. For British families in the 60s and early 70s, this was simply a very good car that did everything they needed. But there's a darker side to this story. British Leyland failed to develop a proper replacement. A hatchback version, dubbed YDO 15, had been running as a prototype by mid-1966, but the company criminally ignored this opportunity for expansion, deciding it wasn't a car for the UK market. They never tried installing the larger B-Series powertrain, which surely would have fitted and given the car the performance needed to truly compete with the Cortina. Instead, British Leyland's preferred solution was to spend millions on entirely new cars: the Austin Maxi in 1969, the Morris Marina in 1971, and the Austin Allegro in 1973. None of these captured the magic of the original 1100 over 1300, Truth 7. It achieved immortality through John Cleese's tree branch. Finally, let's talk about how this car achieved a kind of immortality that BMC never intended. On October 17, 1975, the Gourmet Night episode of Fawlty Towers was broadcast on BBC Two. In this episode, Basil Fawlty's Austin 1100 Countryman registration, WLG 142E, refuses to start at the most inopportune moment. Basil's response has become one of the most iconic moments in British television comedy. Right, well, don't say I haven't warned you. I've laid it on the line for you time and time again. Basil shouts at his car. Right, so, this is it. I'm going to give you a damn good thrashing. He then proceeds to attack the uncooperative vehicle with a tree branch, beating the bonnet and windscreen in a fury of frustration. According to John Cleese, the scene had to be filmed several times to find a tree branch with just the right level of rigidity to make it funny. Too stiff, and it wouldn't bend comically. Too flexible, and it wouldn't look like he was really giving the car a proper thrashing. The branch they eventually used was perfect, creating that iconic bendy effect as Basil vented his rage on the innocent Austin. The 1100 Countryman was a quintessential middle-class runabout by 1975. It was refined, practical, and already pretty passé, despite being around in enormous numbers. It perfectly matched Basil's self-image, respectable on the surface but prone to spectacular breakdowns under pressure. The car became a visual metaphor for the man. But here's the thing. By the time that episode aired, the Austin 1100 Countryman was already out of production. The final British ADO 16, a Vanden Plas Princess 1300, had left the factory on June 19, 1974. The final years of ADO 16 production in the UK were not happy ones. British Leyland and its component suppliers were hopelessly strike-ridden, and economic collapse was approaching. Cleese would go on to abuse another 1,100 inches. The film Clockwise and co-star with one in a 1980s television advertisement for Talking Pages. The car that Basil Fawlty thrashed became more famous in death than it ever was in life. Today, That scene is instantly recognizable to multiple generations who've never even seen an Austin 1000 100 inches person. In a way, it's fitting. The Austin 1000 100 over 1000 300 deserved better than it got. It deserved proper rust protection. It deserved consistent quality control. It deserved dealers who understood its technology. It deserved a manufacturer that would update it intelligently rather than letting it stagnate. But what it got was immortality through comedy, a damn good thrashing that ensures it will never be forgotten. So there you have 7 shocking truths about the Austin 1000 100 over 1000 300 that they never told you. A car designed by a genius who made critical errors. A manufacturing nightmare with 29 variants. A production process paralyzed by 254 strikes in a single year. Revolutionary suspension technology that owners didn't understand. An American export disaster with 70% warranty claims. Britain's bestseller for 8 years, despite fundamental stagnation. And immortality achieved through being beaten with a tree branch on national television. Over 2.1 million of these cars were built between 1962 and 1974, making it second only to the Mini in BMC production numbers. It was Britain's best-selling car from 1963 to 1966, and from 1968 to 1971. More than half were sold in the UK home market. Yet today, as of February 2016, according to DVLA data, there were only 640 examples taxed and on UK roads. If you owned one of these cars, or your parents did, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Did yours rust away? Did you experience the hydroelastic suspension? Did the automatic transmission fail? Or did you have one of those rare examples that just kept running reliably for years? Share your experiences below. The Austin 1000 100 over 1000 300 represents both the triumph and tragedy of the British motor industry. The engineering brilliance was there, the design vision was there, the market demand was certainly there. But industrial chaos, cost-cutting compromises, and management failures turned what could have been a world-beating car into a cautionary tale. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. There are so many more stories from this era that deserve to be told. Stories of brilliant engineers working under impossible constraints, of workers fighting for dignity in struggling industries, of cars that could have changed the world but were let down by the systems that built them. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important stories are the ones they tried to forget.